Welcome back, Your Excellency. In this video, we're going to learn all about conditional formatting in Excel, including some of the trickier concepts around getting entire rows to format based on a single cell's value, and we'll also point out the rather confusing precedence rules that Excel uses for conditional formatting. But fear not, intrepid spreadsheet scholar, conditions are ripe for big learning. Let's first get the starter file for this project. As usual, you'll find it in the Google Drive at bit.ly/excel-starter-files, all lowercase. You'll want to find the file named rev500 starter, right-click on that, select download. I'm going to download mine to the desktop, and I'm going to open it in Excel. Now we get a couple of warnings at the top of the workbook. We can click Enable Content. The profits column here is not enabled. That's not data that Excel provides for us. I just entered those numbers myself, but that's okay. We just want some numbers we could work with. And we can also click the X to silence the warning about financial data. And why don't we also save as? We'll call this file Conditional Formatting Lesson. I'll zoom in to 200% so you can see my screen a bit better. Now I'm also going to convert this data to a table, so I'll click on a cell inside the area I want to turn into a table, and I'll use the keyboard shortcut, Command-T on a Mac, Control-T on Windows. And we don't need to work with a table, but it's a good idea to do this because if we make changes like adding a new row into our table, this should continue to keep the formatting that we set up and apply it to that newly inserted row. So I'll click OK to create a table with a basic format, but since I'm going to be adding my own conditional formatting, I want to get rid of any of the cell formatting inside of this table. And I'm going to do this by heading up to these table styles that are in the table ribbon. And if you click the left arrow 3 times, you should see an icon showing a table with no formatting. In fact, if you hover your cursor over this icon, it will show you the tooltip that says none. So I'll click this and all the cell formatting goes away. I'm going to adjust the column width so that I can see all of my data, and I'm also going to set freeze pane. So I'll click in C4, head up to the view ribbon, and select freeze panes. Now I do want to format the numbers in this table. So first let's format the revenues. I'm going to click in C2, and I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut to select until the last cell in this list of cells. So that keyboard shortcut is going to be Shift Command down arrow on the Mac, Shift Control down arrow on Windows. And with this row of values selected, I'm going to head over to the home ribbon. I'll click on the $ icon, and I'll click twice on the reduce decimals icon. Now I'm also going to show you a few more navigation tricks. First, if you want to quickly get to the top of the table, you've got a few options. One way is to simply click on any of the cells in the header and the frozen pane at the top, and if you click the down arrow, you'll see the rest of the table scrolls up, so you're now at the top of the scrollable pane. Now here's another useful tip for quickly selecting a column. Just hold down the Control key and press spacebar. Same on Mac and Windows, and the entire column is selected. Want to select a row? That's Shift plus spacebar. Now since I've already selected all the cells in the column, this selects all of the rows in the column selection that I've made. It's the same as selecting the entire table. If you click back on one cell, there's another way that you can select the entire table. That's Command-A on Mac for select all, or Control-A on Windows. We can see all the data inside the table is selected except for the headers. But if you click back on a cell, then hold down Shift and press space, you'll select just one row. I actually don't want the row, I want the column, so I'm going to click on a single cell inside of my profits column. I'm going to hold down Control, then press space, and I've selected the entire profits column. So again, these are 3 really useful keyboard shortcuts. You might want to memorize these. Control spacebar to select a column, Shift spacebar to select a row, and Command-A on the Mac or Control-A on Windows to select all the contents of the table. And with this selected, I'll click the $ and then reduce decimals so that I have no decimals showing. Then I'll click somewhere inside of my revenue change column, that's the D column. I'll hold down the Control key, press space, the whole column is selected, and I'll format this as a percentage by clicking on the % icon. Now let's get into conditional formatting. So I'd like to change the formatting in my profit column to show the most profitable firms. So I'm going to click in that column, I'm going to select all the cells by holding down my Control key and pressing spacebar. Then with the cells I want to work with selected, I can see right here on the home ribbon, there's a conditional formatting icon. So let's click on that icon and take a look. And for our first foray into conditional formatting, let's select Top Bottom Rules. And in here we've got a submenu. Let's select Top 10 Items. This pulls up the new Formatting Rules dialog. We see the first pull down here says Format only top or bottom ranked values. We've got top selected. Why don't we keep that? We'll show the top 10. % is not clicked. But if we're going to show the top 10, let's not show them in red. Why don't we show them in green? Because that means they're making the coin. So if we click on this Format with pull down menu, we see we got a bunch of different options here. Why don't we select the third one, Green Fill with dark green text, select that, click OK, scroll to the top, and will you look at that? We see the profit cells for the 10 most profitable firms are highlighted with a green background and dark green text. Nice. Now you can start to see the power for using Excel for data analysis and quickly revealing insights. For example, if we scroll down, we can see the firm Intel here, and this is a firm that you might have studied in your course if you're also using my Business and Tech Concepts Information Systems textbook, and if you are, thank you very much. And we see even though Intel is only number 45 in revenues, the money coming into the firm, they're top 10 in profits. So what does this tell you? The firm must have great profit margins because they're making a lot more profit per revenue than a bunch of other firms that have greater revenues than Intel does. We can also do a top 10% instead of a top 10. So I'm going to undo the last conditional formatting, make sure that you've got the selection of all of the values in the profit column. We'll head up to conditional formatting, select top bottom rules, select top 10%. This is the exact same box we saw when we selected top 10. The only difference here is percent is selected this time. And under format with, we'll once again pull down here and select green and click OK. And we see far more firms in here. Excel automatically does the calculation for us and colors in the cells that are in the top 10% of profitability. So if you think about it, we're looking at the Fortune 500. There are 500 firms. 10% of that means there are 50 firms that have their profit cell highlighted in green. Now we can also inspect any rules we've created to delete or modify them by selecting conditional formatting again, and down here selecting manage rules. Now let's select the rule that we just created. So we'll highlight that rule. We'll click the edit rule button. Then in this box, we can click off the percentage. So now we should just calculate the top 10 instead of the top 10%. We'll click OK and OK again, and we're back to just the top 10. Sometimes it takes a moment for Excel to recalculate the conditional formatting, but as we scroll up and down, we can see the formatting change. Now also note that the rules will show for the current selection by default. So if I click on a cell outside of my table area, then I go back to conditional formatting and select manage rules, I don't see anything, but no need to panic. That's just because the show formatting rules pull down has current selection selected. Now I have no rules in the cell that I'm clicked in over here on the side, but if I pull down the Show Formatting Rules For menu, I can also select the worksheet or this table. So if I select table, my rule shows. Now I'll cancel and get out of here. Now let's highlight the least profitable firms. So I'll make sure that I've clicked on a cell in the profits column. I'll hold down the control key and press the space bar. I've selected all of my profits. Then I'll head up to conditional formatting, select top bottom rules, bottom 10. Whoops, I selected bottom 10% by accident, not 10, but no biggie, because I can just deselect the percent box here. I'll keep it red, click OK, and we've highlighted the 10 biggest money losers in red. Let's scroll down and see them. We can do some quick analysis here, and whoa, the first one that shows up is GE. It's based close to where I'm recording this video right here in Boston. It's one of the largest firms in the world by revenue, but they're in a world of hurt from a profit perspective. They're one of the biggest money losers in the Fortune 500. Let's scroll down and see more. Dow Chemical lost over $1 billion. CenturyLink was a big money loser last year. PG&E racking up the big losses. And ouch, there's Uber. The year has not been kind. Even though the company brought in more than $14 billion in revenues, it lost more than $8.5 billion. Ouch! Now we can keep these two formatting rules in the profits column, but we can also add more formatting rules, including ones on other columns. So let's format this revenue change percentage column. This column represents how much revenue has changed from the previous year when compared to the revenue that's shown in column C. So to highlight this column, why don't we click somewhere in column D? We'll hold down the control key and we'll press the space bar. The revenue change column is highlighted. Now let's head back to conditional formatting and look at this first option here, this one that says highlight cells rules. Now we won't use this in this lesson, but do know that these options exist because you may have to use them in the future. And we can see that we can format based on values that are greater than a given value, less than a value, between two values, equal to a value, values that contain text, values that fall on a given date, values that are duplicates, which is especially useful if you're cleaning data and you're looking to remove any unwanted repeated values. But for now, let's head back over to top bottom rules. And we see all the options we have here. Let's select below average. And what's nice about this is we don't have to create an average formula. Excel will calculate this for us automatically. So we'll keep the default options that show up in this box. This will highlight values that are below the given average in red. Click OK. And every cell that has a revenue change value below the average is highlighted in red. And you can scroll to take a look at these values. And again, this doesn't mean that these firms lost money. It just means that their revenue didn't grow as much as the average firm. So some of these firms even have positive growth values. They're just below the overall average of all the firms. So I'm going to undo this formatting and check out some other options. I'm going to keep the revenue change column highlighted, and let's go back to conditional formatting. And this time, let's take a look at data bars. And this will show little graphic bars representing the numeric value in the cell when compared to the other values in the column. Now, gradient values fade color as you get closer to the ends of the bars. Solid colors are, as expected, solid without the gradient. Let's select this green option in the center of the top gradient row. And whoa, look at that. I'm going to click on a single cell to get rid of the column selection so that I can see the bars better. And let's scroll around and take a look. Again, it's a really great way to draw your attention to some of the outliers. We see lots of growth at Amazon, CVS, Alphabet, Cigna brought in far more money than the previous year. Keep scrolling, and we can see the bar provides a visual cue drawing your eye to the outliers. So why don't we take a quick look at the solid bars versus the gradients that we just saw. So I'm going to undo the last formatting. Just make sure that revenue change is selected. So you can click any cell in there, hold down the control key and press spacebar. And with revenue change selected, we'll head up to conditional formatting. We'll select data bars, and I'm going to select the solid green option. And you can see by the sigma value in here that if the bar grows on top of the number value, it can be a little tougher to read. So oftentimes gradient is a better choice. But I'm going to undo this again. And also know that you've got a lot of options for data bar customization. So if we go back and select conditional formatting, data bars, and then more rules here at the bottom, you can specify positive versus negative value colors. You can set solid colors, gradient colors, lots of other options. So feel free to return to this and explore on your own. But for now, I'm going to cancel out of here. So let's undo this data bar formatting and let's explore some more under conditional formatting. And we see under color scales, we've got a bunch of different options. Now these fade from one color for the greatest value to another color representing the lowest value. So if we select this first option, green or positive, red or negative, the values in the middle are yellow, and that looks ghastly. Let's try another one. We'll undo. We'll head back to conditional formatting, color scales, and why don't we try this third option from the left, green at the top for positive, red on the bottom for negative, but white in the middle, and I'll click to remove the selection so that we can see the colors a little bit better. And as we scroll around, we can see the colors really help tell our numeric story. Darker green values for big positive revenue changes, darker red values for revenue drops. Very nice. And just like with our data bars, you also have under color scale some more rules where you can specify all sorts of options for the colors that you want to use and how those color scales are shown. Now under conditional formatting, let's explore one more option. Let's take a look at icon sets. So you can see that we have icons for directional movement, shape, indicators, check marks and flags, and various ratings icons. Now, if you select one of these icons, Excel will break up the range of the values in your selection into equal portions, and it will put one icon in each portion of that range. So for example, if we select the 4 directional icons here, Excel will put the straight up arrow in the top quartile, the angled up arrow in the second quartile, the angled down arrow in the third quartile, and the down arrow in the fourth quartile. Now, if we take a look, this actually doesn't produce very satisfactory results, and that's because there are positive numbers that actually have downward pointing arrows. But fear not, intrepid Excel user, we can customize these ranges. So let me show you how to do that. We're going to head back up to conditional formatting, and we're going to select Manage Rules at the very bottom of this pull down. Now the Show Formatting for Rules box says Current Selection, and I've still got my current selection for my arrow icons highlighted, so that's why I'm only seeing one rule here. But I want this rule for the current selection. This is exactly what I want, so let's click on the Edit Rule button. Now if you take a look at this, Excel has assigned each icon to an equal portion of the percentage of values in the range. Now don't get confused by the word percentage under type. Even though our values are formatted as percents, this does not refer to the percentage that's inside of our cells. Instead, it refers to the overall percentage based on the distribution of values in this selection. So for example, in this first icon, up green arrow is the top quartile or 75%, yellow diagonal up is the second quartile or 50%, yellow diagonal down is the third quartile or 25%, and everything below that is the down red arrow. Now, instead of working off of percentages, I want to work off of numbers. So I want the numbers to point in directions depending on the specific number that's inside of the cell. So I'll click on all the type pull downs and switch them from percent to number. And now this is very important since my numbers are actually formatted as percents. I'm going to enter my values as a number with the percent symbol. Otherwise, I'd have to enter them as decimals. So in this first value here, for my upward pointing green arrow, I'm going to put in 10%. Now, if I didn't put in the percent symbol, I could just put 0.1. Then for the yellow diagonal up, I'm going to have that for every value that's above 0 up until 10%, so I don't have to make any change there. The down yellow arrow will be everything from 0% down to -5%, and anything below that will be the red arrow. So now let's take a look at this setup. We'll click OK and OK again, and this looks great. Every value over 10% has a green arrow. Every value between 0 and 10% has an upward pointing yellow arrow. The downward pointing yellow arrows are from 0 through -5%, and everything below that has a red arrow. So we got a lot of formatting complexity so far. And if you want to see the rules that we've created, we can head up to conditional formatting. We can select Manage Rules. And now my highlighted cell is in the D column for revenue change. You can't really see it, but up here in the upper left-hand corner in the name box, it says D2, so that's where my selection is. So I'm only showing the formatting rules for the current selection. See this pull down menu up here? That's why I only see this one rule. But if I pull down this menu, I can select this worksheet. And now I can see all 3 rules that I've created on this worksheet. Now, I could click on these rules, select them one by one, and then click on the minus icon here in the lower left. But instead, I'm going to delete all of these rules at once so that I can start from scratch. I'm going to cancel out of this box. I'll head back up to Conditional Formatting, and then down here there's a selection that says Clear Rules, and from this I'm going to select Clear Rules from Entire Sheet. That gets rid of all 3 rules that I've created so far, and I can start again from scratch. Now sometimes you don't want a single cell in the row to highlight. You'd like the whole row to highlight based on the value of a given cell, and that's a bit trickier to achieve. So let me first show you a common mistake that I've seen a number of students make, so that if you see this, you know what's going on and you know how to avoid it. Now some Excel users might wonder, what would happen if I highlighted more than one column and then I tried conditional formatting? So let's click inside of the table. We'll do a select all, that's Command A on the Mac, Control A on Windows. Then we'll select the conditional formatting icon, top bottom rules, top 10%, and we'll go with a green selection here. Click OK. And if we scroll down, we see that this formatting considers numbers across all columns. That means values in my revenues column, my revenue change column, and my profits column. So I can see in the revenue column, these numbers are all highlighted in green. If they're above, at the bottom here, it's just over 17 billion. But now let's look over here in the profits column. I also see that this applies to profits, any values that are above 17 billion. So what it's doing is it's taking a look at all of the numbers on this worksheet. That's all 3 numeric columns. So it's not just 10% of one of these columns, it's 10% of all 3 of the columns combined. Now that figure turns out to be just north of 17 billion, including these middle numbers here where there's nothing highlighted. These are just revenue change percentages. None of them is north of 17 billion. And you know what? Column A, our rank column, is also a numeric column, so there are 4 columns in this consideration. But all of these columns are taken together, and the top 10% across all the columns are what's highlighted. And that's not at all what I want. So be careful not to do that. Let's undo. And so now let me show you how you can highlight an entire row based on the value of a single cell. And in this first example, we'll highlight an entire row in red if the firm has profits that are negative, meaning below 0. Now, this first bit is very important, and most tutorials, including Microsoft's own documentation, do not do a good job of explaining this requirement. And I remember when I was learning how to do this, I actually spent quite a bit of time trying to figure out why my formatting was off. So here's the scoop. When you're setting conditional formatting to apply to an entire row, you want to make sure that you click in the topmost cell of the range of cells that you're going to be formatting. Now, since we're going to be working with this table here, it starts in row 2. So you want to make sure that you click on a cell in row 2. You can click on any of these cells as long as they're in the table, but I think E2 is a good choice since I'm going to be working with profits. Then I'll select the rest of the table with a Command A on the Mac, Control A on Windows, and even though my whole table is selected, my first selected cell is still in row 2. That is a must. You've got to be in the topmost row. Then let's head to Conditional Formatting. We'll select New Rule. Now this dialog box looks slightly different for Windows users. So Windows users, you don't have the style selection in the new formatting rule dialog that I'm about to demonstrate, so you can forget about this Style Classic pull down that I'm about to demonstrate on the Mac. You can just follow by selecting the option Use a Formula to determine which cells to format, which I am going to demonstrate on the Mac. But Windows users, the setup and formula should otherwise work just as demonstrated. Now Mac users, this isn't super intuitive, so you probably want to commit these steps to memory. In Style, you want to select Classic. That's the bottom option on this pull down menu here. Then you want to select in the menu below that the bottom selection on this pull down too. It says, use a formula to determine which cells to format. If it helps, you just selected the bottom selection on these 2 pull-down menus in the new formatting box. Windows users, your box should look like this one on the left. Just make sure that you've selected use a formula to determine which cells to format, and you're going to enter your formula right in here. Now let's create our formula to determine the cells to format. So we're going to enter an equal sign in this box, then click on E2 in the profits column. That's the first profits column cell in our table's range. Now note that this shows up as an absolute reference, and we don't want that. We want the formatting to consider the cells in the column E alone, but all rows from 2 all the way to the bottom of the table. Now this calls for a mixed reference, so I'm going to change $E, $2 to $E2. Now I'm going to change this manually because I'm using a Mac. Unfortunately, the Mac keyboard shortcut for toggling between relative, absolute, and the 2 types of mixed reference does not work reliably inside dialog boxes. So it's usually Command T, which I can't get to work at all. You can also try function key 4 on the Mac. That only seems to work sometimes. You can probably toggle just fine on Windows with function key 4. But then after manually entering this in as $E2, then I'm going to complete the formula with less than 0. Click OK, scroll around and take a look, and hey, much easier to read. The entire line is highlighted if you have profits that are below zero. Now this formatting is dynamic and it responds to any changes in the data. So to test this, let's cook the books for GE. So we'll click on the negative profit value. Up here in the formula bar, I'll remove the minus out front so this value is no longer negative. We'll press return, and we see that the red highlighting goes away. Now I don't want to be accused of accounting fraud, so I'll undo this change, and the red highlighting comes back. Nice! Now we can go one step further, and instead of entering a literal value like the 0 in our last formula, we can instead refer to another cell in our worksheet, and if we change this one cell, we can change which rows are highlighted in our table. So let's do this by creating a cell to determine what constitutes terrible growth, and we'll highlight all of the rows that have a revenue change percentage that's below this terrible growth value. So to do this, first what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of all the existing highlighting that I've got. So I'll press the undo keyboard shortcut to get rid of first the GE change that I made and then the formula that I entered. That's Command Z on Mac, Control Z on Windows. Press that as many times as you need to in order to get rid of the row formatting. Then I'm going to enter a cell to hold my terrible growth value just above my current table. So let's make room for it. We'll right click on row 1 and we'll select Insert. That adds a row. Then I'll enter the label for terrible growth in C1. Just type in terrible growth. Then over in D1, I'll enter the first figure for terrible growth. We'll say terrible growth is any revenue change value that's minus 5% or below. And then I'll return to D1, and I'm going to format that cell using the Cell Styles option on the home ribbon. And if we take a look in here, there's a red formatting option that actually has bad in it, so we'll select that. And then the rest of our setup for this formula is nearly identical to what we just did. Remember what we did. You want to click on the cell in the first row of our table range. So I'm going to click on D3. Then you want to highlight the entire table range. Command A on the Mac, Control A on Windows. If we scroll back up to the top, that we can see that even though we've got our entire table selected, we've still got our first cell selected. For me, it's in D3. You want to make sure that you're in some cell in the top row of your table selection. Then let's head up to Conditional Formatting, select New Rule. Now, if you're on the Mac, do you remember our tip on which two items to select? You want to select the bottom option of these two pull downs. So under Style, the bottom option is Classic, and then in the menu below that, you want to select Use a Formula to determine which cells to format. And Windows users, you only have that second item to select. Now I'm going to move the new formatting box so that I can see the cells underneath it, and then I'm going to enter my formula down here as $. Then I'm going to click on D3. Now Excel enters that as an absolute reference, $D, $3, and I don't want that. I'm going to change this absolute reference to a mixed reference, $D3. So I want to anchor the column in D, but I want the row to shift down. Then after this, I'm going to enter the less than symbol and the equal to symbol. So I want to highlight whenever D3 is less than or equal to, and then I'm going to click on D1. That's our terrible growth cell. And notice that Excel enters this as an absolute reference. And I want to keep this as an absolute reference. I don't want that value to change as we consider each row in the table, but we do want the row value to change. Then click OK, and would you look at that? Formatting looks great. The rows that are highlighted have a revenue change value that's less than or equal to negative 5%. That's our terrible growth value. Let's make sure that we can change the value in D1, that terrible growth value, and change the formatting. I'll first enter negative 10% in here. We see far fewer firms are highlighted in red. Then I'll change this to a 0%. That's no growth. And we see that all firms that have 0 or less growth are highlighted in red. Nice! I'll switch back to negative 5% in the terrible growth value. Looking good. The row highlighting changes again, and now let's make sure you know how to do this by issuing a challenge. You're going to build on what we got by adding another rule to show solid growth in a cell the user can change, and any firms that are at or above that solid growth value should be highlighted in green. So what you want to do is add a solid growth value below the terrible growth value. You want to set the cell format for the solid growth value to the good green format. Then you want to create a new rule. You want to highlight any row in green if it has a revenue change value at or above the value of the good growth. Give it a shot. I know you can do it. Why don't you pause the video here? And then after you've tried this out, why don't we resume and we'll take a look at a solution. So first let's add a row below terrible growth. We'll right click on row 2, we'll select Insert, we'll add the label Solid Growth in C2, the red bad formatting carried down to D2, so let's change that by selecting D2, then in Cell Styles on our home ribbon here, we'll select the good cell style, that's this green one here, and let's add a preliminary value for solid growth in D2, we'll enter 10%, Then remember, to create a formula to format a selection of rows, you want to click on the very first row in the range. For us, that's now row 4. So I'm going to click on cell D4. Then I want to select the entire range. Command A on Mac, Control A on Windows. Then we'll select Conditional Formatting, New Rule, and then the style is classic. That's the last selection in this pull down. Also make the selection use a formula to determine which cells to format. That's the last selection in this pull down. Then enter the formula as $. Now I can click on any cell in column D, but I want to change that so that it reads $D4. Now the 4 represents the very first cell in our table range. Then I'm going to follow this with greater than or equal to, and then I'm going to click in D2, and I'm going to leave this as the absolute reference. Then under Format With, I'm going to pull down here and change the color to green. I'll click OK, and this looks spectacular. Green and red, like a Christmas tree of Excel goodness. Nice work. And if for some reason you didn't get that right, just go back and try it again on your own until you got it down cold. But you can see we can switch up our solid growth values, and as we do that, we change the highlighting in our table. Good work. Now we're going to add one more value to change our conditional formatting, but first let's take a look at our current formatting rules. So if we're trying to highlight firms that are in trouble by showing them in red, we can set our terrible growth value to 0, and we see that this highlights all firms in red that have seen revenues decline from the previous year. But we also see that many of these firms are still wildly profitable. Apple, for example, saw revenues contract by 2%, but it was still the most profitable firm on the list with over $55 billion in profits. So why don't we add another formula in here? We'll add a cell below solid growth and we'll label that big profits. And we can use this to turn any row green if they have profits above a particular threshold. Now the reason why this is interesting is it will tie the green highlighting threshold to solid growth, which looks at the revenue change column, and will also tie green highlighting to profits, which looks at the profits column. But the setup to add this third formula is just like we set up the other two. We add another row below row 2 by right-clicking on row 3 and selecting Insert. Then we enter Big Profits as our label in C3. The good formatting carried down, so we'll keep that, and I'll enter a preliminary Big Profits value as $10,000, which is really 10 billion since we're valued in millions. Then, before we add our formula, we'll click in a cell in the first row in our table range, so I'll click in E5, since 5 is now the first row in this table range. Then select the entire table range, that's Command A on the Mac, Control A on Windows. Then we'll select Conditional Formatting, New Rule. For the style pull down, we'll select Classic, and in the pull down under that, we'll select Use a Formula to determine which cells to format. And the formula should be equals $E5, that's E because this time we're looking at the profits column, and this should be greater than or equal to D3. And when I click on D3, we'll keep this as an absolute reference. We don't want those values to change. We'll click OK. And oops, I made a mistake. I forgot to change the color to green, but I'm glad I made this mistake because I can now show you how to fix it. So the way we do that is we head up to Conditional Formatting, we select Manage Rules, we select the rule we want to change, and that's the first rule that I have selected here. We know that's the rule because this is the one that looks at $E5. That's the profits column. Then we'll click on Edit Rule, and under Format With, we'll change the color to green. We'll select OK. We'll click OK again, and we see this third formula works fine. All these top values with profits above $10 billion are highlighted in green, even if, like Exxon and Apple, they have negative growth as indicated by a negative revenue change percentage. Now I'm going to change the big profits value from 10,000 to 15,000, that's 15 billion, and the numbers change, but all of a sudden my formatting looks crooked, and that's because sometimes it takes Excel a little while to calculate the change in formatting, but I'll just scroll around, and we'll see by the time I get back the calculations are made, and the formatting looks good. Now before we finish, I want to point out one more confusing thing in Excel that I've seen trip up students. So first, let's take a look at our formulas. We'll head up here and click on Conditional Formatting, then select Manage Rules. Now at first we don't see any of our rules, but we know how to get these to show. We just go up under the Show Formatting Rules for and select Table, and now we see all 3 rules that we created that apply to our table. Now look what Excel says up here. It says Rules Applied in Order Shown. Now I don't think that that's very clear wording because if we applied the rules from top to bottom, the bottom rule should be applied last, and we should see Apple and Exxon turning red. We didn't. How come? Well, despite Excel's wording in this dialog box, the first rule to show has precedence. And the way this works in Excel is if the topmost rules are used to set formatting, then any rules below them won't change that formatting. Now, I don't like the way this operates because it's counterintuitive to the way that you would actually program this. If you had a list of statements, they'd execute from the top to the bottom, and whatever was the last statement would be the statement that executed. But that's not how Excel's conditional formatting precedence works. Let's see this in action by changing the rule order. Now, I'm going to click on the last rule. That's the one with the red formatting. And then in the upper right-hand corner, I'm going to click on the Change Rule Order up arrow button twice. Now, this moves the rule to the top. It's executed first. And if this rule changes the cell color to red, nothing below this rule can change it back. So let's click on OK and see how this changes things. And sure enough, Exxon and Apple were formatted in red, and the green formatting never had a chance to be evaluated since this red formatting rule took precedence in any of the rows where it was used. So that was a quick demo of what I think is the very confusing rule precedence in Excel. Let's change this back. We'll head up to Conditional Formatting, Manage Rules, Show All Rules in this table, and with that top red formatting rule highlighted, we're going to click the down arrow under Change Rule Order twice, then we'll click OK, and we're back to normal. Now also know that each new conditional formatting rule that you add is moved to the top of the precedence list. So the last rule that you enter will be the first one evaluated unless you change the rule order. And that's it. Once again, we learned a ton of valuable techniques in this video lesson. You conquered conditional formatting. I hope you're feeling good about your skills. Stay excellent.